In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and this set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Bunnies, bunnies, bunnies. Oh, is that rabbits, rabbits, rabbits? Excuse me, Sean. Sean's little, I didn't mean to diminish your superstition. On the first of every month, you must say rabbits 3 times. Okay, we did it. Will America have a free, and it's November 1st, by the way. Will America have a free and fair vote or a government chosen through violence? We'll get to that in just a moment. My rant for the day. Also, Republicans are continuing to flood the zone with lying polls. This is an amazing story, and just a brilliant piece about it over at Daily Kos. I'll tell you about in just a moment. And another Democratic politician has been violently assaulted ahead of the vote. I'll tell you about that. In the second hour of our program, Guillaume Long is going to drop by, talking about Lula's victory shows what's possible when everyone's in. But Bolsonaro has not yet conceded and says he's going to give a speech today. Already, they're starting, his followers, Bolsonaro's followers, are shutting down Brazil. They're literally blockading roads, barricading roads with truck convoys and things like that. We'll talk about that. Also, NBC News is finally knocking Republican attempts to make Republican violence equivalent to protest. We'll talk about that in the second hour. In our third hour, just plain mean alert. You can't sink any lower than Don Jr.'s recent tweet. And a crazy alert. New Hampshire Republicans claim there are still kitty litter boxes for kids identifying as cats in their schools. They're naming schools, and the schools are saying, what? What? I'll tell you about that in the third hour of the program. But let's start with this harpoon that is pointed right at the heart of American democracy. This goes back to 1964 in the United States. Voter fraud, let's just start out at the beginning. Voter fraud is a thing that pretty much does not exist across developed democracies around the world. It's just, I mean, voters vote, but they tend not to vote fraudulently. They don't pretend they're other people. They don't vote multiple times. In pretty much every developed democracy in the world. In fact, a lot of countries don't even have voter registration. You just show up on election day and show your ID that, you know, that shows that you're a citizen of the country, and boom, you vote. It's that simple. In a lot of these countries, a lot of developed countries, they mail you the ballot, and you know, if you're a citizen, you just automatically get a ballot and you send it back. They don't even have voter registration systems in many of these countries because, you know, voter registration systems are something that were developed in the United States back in the 1800s in the South to prevent black people from voting. So, you know, what's this? Where did this whole voter fraud thing come from that has now become the weapon that the Trumplicans, the Trump-humping Republicans, are using to try to tear down our democracy and replace it with a fascist oligarchy, I suppose you could call it? Where did this come from? Well, it started actually, well, first of all, as I mentioned, the whole idea of voter fraud and the need for voter registration goes back to the Old South in the 1830s through the 1860s. And then afterwards, during Reconstruction, in a big way, you know, the 1860s to the early 1900s, this was a thing that was used in the South to prevent black people from voting. And the excuse that they used was that black people were voting fraudulently. But it pretty much only existed in a handful of southern states. And, you know, there was no national discussion about voter fraud in the United States until 1964. In 1964, Democratic President Lyndon Johnson got the Civil Rights Act passed through Congress in July of 1964. It was signed. And that was an election year. And Johnson was up for re-election. He was running against Barry Goldwater. And Goldwater's campaign, started this thing saying that there was widespread voter fraud in the United States. And they started a program called Operation Eagle Eye that William Rehnquist, the guy who became the Chief Justice of our U.S. Supreme Court, participated in Arizona, where all across the country under Operation Eagle Eye in 1964, they had, you know, basically white lawyers at polling places in black, Hispanic, and Native American communities challenging voters. And if you're challenged, you know, many times, it depends on the election judge who's there, you know, deciding who can and who can't vote. Many times you just lose your ability to vote. It also slows down the lines so that people who have to get back to work are saying, hey, you know, I've been in this line 3 hours because that guy up there William Rehnquist up there is challenging every single black voter. And so screw it, I'm going to go back to work. I can't afford this. So in 1964, this became a thing in the United States. Now, the media largely ignored it, or at least ignored this Republican scam. And when we started seeing long lines in black districts, this started in a big way in the 60s, where states, white-controlled states, and they're all white-controlled states, you know, and always have been, white-controlled states would cut back on the number of polling places and the number of voting machines or voting locations in black areas in particular, but also in Hispanic and Native American areas, and student areas as well. You would see these long lines, 6, 8, 10 hours long. What was the media's message for the better part of 60 years about those long lines? Well, it looks like black people apparently can't even figure out how to vote right. I mean, that was basically the message that the white-controlled media, catering to a white audience. The advertising dollars in the 1960s were only interested in a white audience. The only black people on TV were buffoons, criminals, and minstrels, essentially. So in 1964, this was what the Goldwater campaign used to try to knock down the Civil Rights Act, the effects of the Civil Rights Act. Now, keep in mind, in 1964, in Mississippi, 35% of the population of Mississippi was black. Only 4% of black Mississippi voters had been able to register to vote because of restrictions on who could register to vote. Alabama was 26% black. Only 7% of African Americans could vote in Alabama. In South Carolina, which was nearly one-third black, 29.2%, only 9% of that state's African Americans could successfully register to vote. In Alabama, which was 26% black, only 7% of the black population had succeeded in getting through the maze that the white power structure had put up. These were not accidents. These were very, very intentional policies. And so to prevent essentially black people from voting, you had this invention, this 1964 invention, that there was massive voter fraud going on exclusively in America's cities, wink, wink, nod, nod, mostly in the black neighborhoods. And that these black people were voting more than once, and Hispanic people were voting using stolen Social Security numbers, and as Donald Trump said in 2019, by the busload. The New York Times did a story about this, by the way. This was on October 30th, 1964. This was the week before the election of 1964. The New York Times, quote, Republican officials have begun, see, this is where it all started. Republican officials have begun a massive campaign to prevent vote fraud in the election next Tuesday, a move that has caused Democrats to cry fraud themselves. The Republican plan, Operation Eagle Eye, is designed, according to party officials, to prevent Democrats from, quote, stealing the 1964 election. Republicans charged that the election was stolen in 1960. Now, keep in mind, back then, nobody even knew what voter fraud was. There was no discussion about this outside of a couple of states in the South that had used it to justify disallowing black people to register to vote. So the New York Times had to inform America. The article continues. The Democratic National Chairman, John M. Bailey, has criticized the Republican plan as a program of voter intimidation. He has sent a protest to all 50 state governors and has alerted Democratic Party officials throughout the country to be on their guard. There is no doubt in my mind, Mr. Bailey wrote the state chairman yesterday, that this program is a serious threat to our democracy as well as to a Democratic Party victory on November 3rd. That was 1964. Republicans have been using this lie about voter fraud in the United States, which does not exist in any developed democracy in the world. This is why we're the only country in the world that has hysteria around this. Republicans have been using this lie to try to prevent black votes from being counted, to try to prevent Hispanic votes from being counted, to try to prevent Native Americans from voting since 1964. And this year, make no mistake about it, this year is a rehearsal for 2 years from now for the presidential election. And this year, we are seeing all across the country Republicans coming out and doing everything they can to make it harder to vote, because using this phony baloney claim that there is voter fraud in the United States. There is not. It by and large does not exist. You say, well, what about that Republican in North Carolina who bought a couple of dozen mail-in ballots from people in a trailer park and voted them Republican? Well, yeah, that guy got busted. If anybody tried to do this kind of thing at scale, that involves more than 6 or 8 people, the word will leak out. You can't keep conspiracies don't work when hundreds of people know about them. And it takes hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of, purchased votes, fraudulent votes to swing an election. So it just doesn't work. Never has, never will. But this is, what they're all squealing about. And the bottom line here is that you can have a democracy, you can have a nation that is governed by leaders who are elected nonviolently, or you can have a nation that is governed by leaders who have seized power through violence, through intimidation, through force. Those are your only 2 choices. And Republicans are saying that they want a government that is seized by intimidation, violence, and force. They tried it on January 6th. They're trying it right now. They're trying to field 50,000 armed people to go to polling places. This is not how a democracy should work. You can read all about it. And by the way, the media has not been doing their damn job until just the last year or so about this whole Republican scam that has been running for 58 years. Since 1964, they've been running this scam on America. You can read all about it at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Will America Have a Free and Fair Vote or a Government Chosen Through Violence?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. I've got to tell you about Republican polling. This is bizarre. 538 is being punked, and you and me too. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how you doing today? Happy Tuesday to you.
Thank you. Back at you.
Yeah, Tom, I'll be honest with you, that story in Florida with DeSantis arresting those people, I think Tampa Bay Tribune did a story about it.
Mm-hmm.
I find it hard that the Justice Department would not step in. We don't do that in this country. That's what they do in dictators' country, man. This department has to step in because that's a clear violation.
Well, there are, I believe, 10, maybe 12. They're all former slave states where if you're a felon, you lose your right to vote forever. And of course, Florida, they had a referendum on this 2 years ago. It was on the ballot, and the people of Florida said, no, let's do away with that. But the Republicans in the Florida legislature figured out a way around that. Saying, well, you don't get your right to vote back until you've paid all your fines. And then people say, well, how do I find out what fines I owe? And the Republicans say, we're not going to tell you.
Okay.
That's I mean, they've got the law. They're controlling the law is what's going on, Omar.
Yeah. And just really quick, Tom, France 24 is reporting that Bolsonaro in Brazil, he reached out to the army, and the army basically turned them down and told them, look, the people have spoken. So that's why he was silenced.
Right. We'll see, because he's going to give a speech today. And he has been huddling with some of his military leaders. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got, these truck drivers shutting down the country all over the place. And this is being promoted, by the way, by social media. This, the Facebook and Twitter in Brazil, in Portuguese, are pushing this really, really, or, people on those platforms pushing them really hard.
Elon Musk and that clown, even Trump and everybody, the whole team. But Tom, I don't know if you've been watching the race in Maryland. I think they're about to get the first African American governor. His name is Westmore, and it's very interesting that he ran an education. He ran basically making community college free in Maryland if he's get elected, and it has resonated. And he ran against former DNC chair Tom Perez. And another very well-established Democrat, I can't think of his name. He's a controller of Maryland. They were both
in the primary.
In the primary, yes, and he beat both of them. And he's basically running on education. And if you look at Glenn Youngkin, he ran on education. He was just on the wrong side. So I think the Democrats have a lesson to learn from here that focusing on education, wiping out student loan, and the last thing I wanted to say, I don't know whether we can trust the poll. What say you? Nate Silver got it wrong in 2016. Can we trust the poll right now? Because I'm really kind of a little bit concerned about 538 and Nate Silver. And I'll take you off the phone. Thank you, Tom.
No, it's good, Omar. The question you just asked is what I'm going to answer in about 31 seconds on the other side of the break, unless I've got to read an ad. But I'll give you a brief preview, and that is that there are 6 polling companies that are fairly openly aligned with the Republican Party, or that use polling techniques that skew toward Republican voters. And those polls from those 6 companies are skewing the polls to make it look like Republicans are ahead of where they are. And frankly, this is going to be another part of what Republicans are going to use after the election when they claim the Democratic victories were fraudulent. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Are you feeling sad and depressed? Are you anxious, worried about the future, feeling isolated and alone? You might be suffering from capitalism. Symptoms include homelessness, unemployment, poverty, hunger, feelings of powerlessness, fear, listlessness, disenfranchisement, isolation, loss of identity, self-loathing, feelings of guilt, loss of free speech, incarceration, fines, suicidal thoughts, death, or revolution. Now, that's kind of the funny one, but the serious thing is that capitalism, unregulated capitalism, unrestrained, laissez-faire, neoliberal capitalism, no income tax capitalism, no regulation capitalism, does produce this kind of a crisis. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to, and you know, thank goodness we are moving in the right direction, I think, back toward regulated capitalism like Franklin Roosevelt gave us, rather than the unregulated neoliberal capitalism of the Trump years. I got a video about this over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. Tag you're it. All righty, so you know, a lot of Democrats have been gnashing their teeth about all these stories that we're hearing about a red wave and the elections, and Republicans are going to win and all these kind of stuff, and et cetera. And don't believe it. Don't believe it. Carrie Eleveld writing over at Daily Kos today. The headline: Republicans flood the zone with pro-GOP polls, bending models in their direction. Again, this is going to play into this Republican narrative that goes back to 1964 of so-called voter fraud. And, this is, Kerry starts out by saying his former Trump aide, Kellyanne Conway, once suggested, if you don't like the facts, just create alternative facts. Well, that's what's going on. He writes, Kerry writes, take Georgia, for instance. Until about October 21st or 22nd, Raphael Warnock had been holding a steady 3 to 4 point lead. And then all of a sudden, the gap narrowed to 1 point in the final week of October. Well, how did that happen? Well, it turns out, and it's pretty straightforward, of the 7 aggregate polls, this was taken since October 21st, 5 of them were conducted by either GOP-aligned groups or pollsters who use friendly GOP modeling or GOP-friendly modeling. Trafalgar Group, Rasmussen Reports, More Information, MOORE, Coefficient, and Insider Advantage. All of them put Walker ahead between 2 and 5 points. But the 2 nonpartisan polls, one conducted by the New York Times and Siena College, and the other by the Atlanta Constitution Journal, they both found that Raphael Warnock has a 3-point lead. So what's going to happen? The Fox affiliates, all the right-wing media are going with these Republican polling companies, saying that, hey, Herschel Walker's winning in Georgia. And everybody's ignoring the fact that, the only 2 nonpartisan polls show Raphael Warnock 3 points ahead. So when Warnock wins, what are the Republicans going to say down in Georgia? Voter fraud! Of course they are. They're being primed for this. Here are the headlines from Fox 5 in Atlanta. Kemp, Walker hold leads in major Georgia races. Fox 29 in Philadelphia, same deal. Fetterman, Oz neck and neck as Shapiro's lead over Mastriano narrows. Fox in Phoenix, 2022 election poll, Lake leads governor's race, Senate race tightens. This is a red mirage. And it's being caused by these polling companies, these right-wing polling companies. And, 538 just aggregates polls. And because these companies are used by Fox, they're considered media-certified polling companies, and they get incorporated into the 538 aggregate. Don't give up hope. You still have to vote, but don't give up hope.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And perhaps more importantly, get ready for the Republican squeals of stolen election, just like Trump did after 2020.
This.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice is in our headline on this article. Not sure where I got. Oh, stateline.org is where I got this from. And in 2020, voters used drop boxes to return 41% of their ballots. And now Texas has banned them. New Hampshire has eliminated them. Wisconsin has gone from 500 locations in 2020 down to 0. Pennsylvania elected officials in one county dropped the number of drop boxes from 6 to 1 and then to 0. Bills to ban drop boxes have passed one house of the legislatures in Idaho, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. Georgia's new law has reduced drop boxes to 80% fewer locations than they had in 2020. In Florida, quote, restrictions on drop boxes will fall disproportionately on black voters, voters affiliated with the Democratic Party, and younger voters, according to a study out of Dartmouth College. The campaign against drop boxes is part of the broader push to make voting more difficult after the 2020 election. Surprise, surprise. And then on top of that, we've got this candidate. Now, yesterday or day before yesterday, I guess it was, we had Paul Pelosi attacked in an attempt to assassinate Nancy Pelosi. And now it's happened in Pennsylvania. A candidate for the State House of Representatives in Pennsylvania. This is the third time he or his property has been assaulted in the last week because he dared to run for Congress for the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania, for the Pennsylvania House, as a Democrat. The guy's name is Richard Ringer. He said he was bloodied and knocked unconscious by an attacker in his backyard around 5 a.m. Mr. Ringer is 69 years old. This is the 51st House District seat. He's running against Republican Charity Grim-Krupa. He says of the guy that attacked him in his own backyard at 5 in the morning, quote, he was larger than I am and he pinned me on my left side. He hit me 10 to 20 times in the head, in the face, and by the eye, and he knocked me out. There have also been 2 incidents of vandalism at Mr. Ringer's home in the last 2 weeks. Somebody spray painted a threat on his garage door, which referenced his political campaign and his being, quote, dead. And somebody else threw a brick through a storm door window. The acting Secretary of State, Lee Chapman, acknowledged on Monday that there has been an increase in election-related threats since the 2020 election, and Trump and this entire Republican machine around him have started promoting this idea that elections are being stolen by Democrats. This is what happens. They sowed the wind in 1964, and we are reaping the whirlwind today. So, picking up your phone calls here, Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's on your mind? Happy Tuesday.
Hey, happy Tuesday, Tom. I'm calling about today's Hartmann report, and specifically the issue of violence, which you kind of led right into for me. If you remember, I told you a while back, I went back onto Facebook and I started to engage the MAGA people. And my hope was to try to persuade, people who are watching or standing on the side, people who are undecided, to see how their facts are wrong. Well, that all ended on Friday for me. And I'm really coming to the opinion that these people are really having mental problems. Basically, they have no fear in telling me that they have absolutely no regrets of what happened to the Pelosi's. The only regret that they have is Nancy wasn't home and her husband wasn't killed. And, it's such a cesspool there that I decided I needed to stop doing that, because it's I feel it's unhealthy for me to be engaging these people in a cesspool. Really.
Well, that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is you may well be talking to somebody operating, out of St. Petersburg. You may well be talking to Russian trolls or Chinese trolls or Iranian trolls, or pick your poison.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I'm not afraid of the threats, but I just decided for my own sake, it's unhealthy for me mentally. Yeah. But also, I do want to mention, I did start going on to the new site Tribal, which is trying to compete against Twitter. And I've only been on it a few days, but I really like it. And the reason why I like it is I feel it gives my speech equal weighting with all the celebrities and other people. And the main reason for that is you post by subject. So when I put something on a subject, and let's say you do, okay, we're both there. Everyone gets to see it. And I'm kind of starting to like it because it gives me an avenue to actually get some stuff out there.
So tell me about this website. I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, it's called Tribal. It's like tribe with an L on the end of it. TRIBEL.
EL?
Pardon me?
EL? That's not how you spell tribal.
Yeah.
It's a misspelling?
Well, okay, all right. Well, it's the way they spell it. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, it's all good.
I'm trying to make it easy for people to see it. Yes, TRIBEL.
Okay, .com?
Yeah. In other words, what I was trying to, yes, .com. And you go on there, and it's very similar to Twitter, but you post by subjects. And I'm starting to like it now. I've only been on it for a couple of days, so the jury's still out on it for me. But I'm starting to think it's a better venue.
Huh. Interesting. Very interesting. All righty. Well, I'll have to check it out. Ziggy, thank you. Thanks for the heads up. And how is the stopbribes.com? How is your little bumper sticker T-shirt business doing?
Everything's going good, but we only have a week left, so I'm really not coming out with any new items. If anyone sends me a suggestion or something, I will put it together. But with only a week to go, by the time you get it in someone's hands, it's going to be election day.
Yeah.
So unless there's something specific. But I'm still going to be working on it, still going to be doing other things. But right now, I don't have any particular new things I'm going to try doing within the last week.
Well, for what it's worth, I am expecting that we will all see challenges to this election, going on for at least the next year. I mean, they're not going to let go, particularly any close races the Democrats won. They're going to do everything they can to disqualify as many voters as possible. So
yeah, I think so too, and I think I'll be putting out some material on that, and also on Medicare Advantage. We need to get more stuff out on that, and that is hot right now, where it can make an impact. So that's probably what I'll be doing. But kind of waiting to see what our results are first.
With the open enrollment period. Okay, Ziggy, thank you very much. Endbribes.com.
Right, thanks,
good talking to you, George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm not a young person anymore, but looking back, it's pretty apparent to me that it's embedded in the DNA of the Republicans to lie, spread falsehoods, utilize propaganda and manipulation and deception. And even to this day, 62 years later, I occasionally read or hear, or actually am in a conversation with a Republican who will insist, after all this time, that the election of 1960 was stolen from Richard Nixon by Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley and the Chicago and Cook County Democrats in Illinois. And they really believe it. And I say, well, pull out your phone and look at the electoral vote totals for 1960, and you will see that Kennedy won with 303 and Nixon lost with 219. Illinois had 27 electoral votes back then. So even if Nixon had carried Illinois, he would have still lost by 276 to 246.
That's right.
And they just don't want to believe it. And then I tell them, you do know that Nixon and the Republicans sent investigators into the state after the election looking for anything that would back up their contention that maybe it was stolen. And they reported back something that anybody who's born and raised in Illinois and is familiar with this state knows, that out of the 101 counties in the state of Illinois, there's Cook County and maybe half a dozen other counties that are primarily Democratic and are reliably blue. The rest of them are rural downstate counties that by and large were run by what they called back then in the 50s and before by Republican, quote, courthouse gangs, unquote,
right,
who it turned out when the investigators found that they did everything Daley did and more to steal the election for Nixon.
Yeah.
So they put it to bed, and Nixon took the high road and said, well, I won't challenge it.
Well, he had no evidence. I mean, there were these wild stories that Daley was dumping voting machines in the Chicago River so they wouldn't be counted, and weird stuff like that, and none of it was true. I mean, it was literally just made up.
Yeah, but it just seems like, at least in my lifetime, and I guess in yours too,
yeah,
the whole approach of the Republican Party is built on a foundation of lies, and they don't seem to be able to get out from under it.
Well, there's a reason for that, George. And the reason is that, all they have to offer voters is tax cuts for billionaires, more pollution, lower wages, the end to unions. I mean, who's going to vote for that, right? Destroy Medicare and Social Security. So they've got to lie to people to get them to win elections. George, thank you for the call. And thanks for bringing the numbers, for bringing the receipts. I knew that if he had lost Chicago, he still would have lost.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Excuse me, let me rephrase that. I knew that if Nixon had won Illinois, he still would have lost the election. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here. Marcia in Taylorsville, Mississippi. Hey, Marcia, what's up?
Marseille.
Marseille, I'm sorry. Okay, what's up?
Yeah, I was listening to you talking about 64 in Mississippi.
Uh-huh.
The biggest part of the suppression then, my remembrance as a child, was, number one, the poll tax.
Yeah.
And number two, a lot of black people had to take a test.
Yep.
Of competence or whatever. If they weren't competent, they weren't allowed to vote anyway, regardless.
That's
or
right.
whatever else, other way they were suppressing it.
Yep.
Number two, this is a supposed democracy. This never was democracy, and it probably never will be. I can remember as a child also with Kennedy. It was close, but he had the popular vote. And I said, well, they're going to change that because one day this electoral college stuff, the wrong person, the person that has the minority of the vote, is going to end up being president. And they didn't change it. But, the biggest problem in any of these elections, and especially the ones in Mississippi, is the gerrymandering.
You're seeing that in your state, that the concentration of political power because of the gerrymandering is affecting how things are done there.
Hey, I'm telling you now.
Yeah, I'm believing you. Marseille, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for filling in the blanks there. Charles in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Mr. Hartmann. I'm down here in our neck of the woods. The constant barrage of political ads on the airwaves are just so disheartening. And the reason for me is that anybody seems to be able to say anything they want about anything without any factual, information to back it up. It's you've talked about the European political advertising restrictions that, hey, you can only spend X amount of money,
right,
and the local TV stations are salivating. But I'm just, what can we do? Because anybody can say anything. And of course, the right is, in my opinion, saying a little bit more stuff that's not fact based. And, everybody, I can alleviate the housing, the homeless problem. I can, bring down the cost of housing. I could do this.
Have you seen this crazy ad that's playing in the Portland market here? We've got a race where we've got a Democratic, the Democratic Speaker of the House who is running to become governor, Tina Kotek, and she's running against a Republican who, is standard, well, not even standard Republican, a Trump humping Republican, right? And the ad for the Republican features a clearly gay man, a black man with tattoos all over him, and a woman who looks like, something from an ad for Yule Gibbons stalking the wild asparagus, all kinds of plaid and kind of hippie and maybe lesbian, I don't know, but, whatever. And those are the three characters in the ad for the Republican. I mean, it's insane, Charles.
What can we do, Tom?
We got to get money out of politics. That's the bottom line. They're carpet bombing us. I mean, we've just got to get money out of politics. Charles, thanks a lot for the call. It's great hearing from you. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Democrats need to start campaigning on family values. It's a great platform. The Republicans have already kind of softened it up for us. What are family values? Well, Franklin Roosevelt talked about this. Lyndon Johnson talked about this. Jack Kennedy talked about this. Family values, strong public schools, a national health care program, and drug costs under control, getting these out-of-control pharmaceutical companies under control. Good pay for mom and dad when they're working, and unions. Outlaw homelessness by housing homeless people. Make it illegal for communities to encourage homelessness, basically, by not having enough housing available. Accept people across the entire LGBTQ spectrum into our families. That's a family value, a fundamental family value. Pure food. Our food supply, rather than polluting it with poisons and junk food, should be good. Our air and water need to be clean. Climate change, we need to get it under control. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Andre in Los Angeles. Hey, what's up?
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Andre.
None of this is new. I agree with what Marseille in the South said. This is a gangster nation founded by and for oligarchs. It was 70 years after the Constitution was written that anyone could vote without owning property. I mean, in the Constitution, it says you had to own 10 acres of land or more.
No, it did not in the Constitution. You're talking about various state laws and.
No, the state laws amended the Constitution to allow voting without being landowners.
Respectfully, that's not the case.
That is the case. The case was that you had to own land, and it was 10 acres in order to vote. You had to be a free man, didn't say free white man, it said a free man, and be a landowner. And people think that this, to tell King George or any monarch that, hey, we know that you gave us these land grants in this confiscated land, but you've got to be pretty gangster to tell a monarch we're taking your colonies.
Are you talking about before the Constitution was signed?
Yes, I'm talking about the founding of the country. From day one, you had a gangster element. And whether they were the Democrats, the old Democrats, or the new Republicans, it's the same mentality.
Yeah,
this is not new. This goes all the way back. And people need to realize that. That's my point.
I got it. I got it. Okay, Andre, thank you very much. Seth in Los Angeles. Hey, Seth, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I think it's time that we stop letting the media say that 60% of Republicans think that the 2020 election was stolen, when really 60% of them don't care that they lost. They just want to have the power. And it's time for us to stop saying that they somehow think that legitimately it was stolen. They know it wasn't stolen. They know this. And certainly all the people running that are election deniers know that it wasn't stolen. And if we start saying it doesn't matter that they know that they lost, they just want to control this no matter what, at least maybe we can start changing the narrative. Just like all they do is talk about inflation. Oh my God, inflation, it's killing everybody. It's killing everybody. It's nonsense. People have jobs.
Yeah.
What's worse, not having a job or inflation?
Well, people are going to find out if the Fed raises interest rates another 0.75 of a point. Seth,
I agree.
I totally get it. And in fact, last night I believe it was on MSNBC, I saw Adam Kinzinger, the Republican from Illinois who is no longer going to be in the House, who's on the January 6th committee, who dared to stand up to Donald Trump. And his point was that the Republicans who are in office right now, all of them, almost without exception, know that Trump lost the election in 2020. They all have information, they have access to the information. They've been briefed by the FBI. They've been briefed by real authorities who could, so they know. But his point was that a lot of these people who are running for political office and who are going to end up in the House of Representatives and maybe even in the Senate after this election, these Republicans, many of them are actually true believers. And he found that much more frightening to have true believers in there than just to have cynics in there. And I think that, if that's your point, I completely agree with it.
Well, yeah, but with all due respect, a true believer that's just dumb, I can somewhat deal with. Somebody who actually knows that they lost and still wants to cheat. Because every time I talk to a Republican friend of mine, I say to them this. I say, let me ask you a question. If you know that the election was free and fair and you guys actually lost, but yet you guys somehow managed to take the election away from the person that won, would you be okay with that? Would you be okay? Because how long do you think it's going to take till that happens to your vote? How long do you think it's going to take till they come for you? And most of them say they want their vote to count. They really, at the end of the day, they want their guy to win, but they don't want him to win to the point where they're willing to lie about the win and cheat the win.
Unless the system works that way. I mean, they were fine with Trump losing in 2016 by almost 3 million votes, as long as the system was rigged, via the Electoral College. They're happy with that. But I get what you're saying.
One last thing. You know what? Whenever anybody says to me, well, I went to bed at night and Trump was up and I woke up and he had lost, I said, a friend of mine's a stockbroker. I said, well, gee, I bought stock in the morning and it was up. And then they made an announcement about earnings and it went down. I can't believe it. It must be rigged. Oh, wait a minute. There was more information that they actually figured out what was going on. Oh, I get it.
So you're actually having these conversations, Seth, with Republicans?
I'm trying. You know what? It's the only way that I can. It's the only way that I can remain friends with them. I mean, there are some guys out there that are just hardcore, cut taxes, take away what they call an entitlement. Let me see. I pay into Social Security, but yet it's an entitlement. I paid into it, but somehow it's an entitlement. I mean.
Well, it's an entitlement because you're entitled to get your own money back.
Well, yeah, but I think they mean like it's something you're guaranteed because.
Right. Entitlement has become a slur in Republican speak.
Exactly. Well, thank you for everything, Tom. I mean, I enjoy your show immensely, and I think it's important for everybody to hear what's being said.
Well, thanks a lot, Seth, and I'm really impressed that you're taking it to people that friends, people that you work with, whatever. It's we all need to be doing that. Seth, thank you very much, and standing up and telling the truth about what's going on in this country, because it's a grim situation right now, and we are on a knife's edge. Democracy itself is on a knife's edge. We'll be right back. We're rolling into the second hour of the program. And let me just check here. Oh, yeah, Guillaume Long is going to be with us. We're going to get the inside story on what's going on in Brazil. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Recurring Crises of American Democracy, 4 Threats. I think 4 Threats is the actual title, by Susan Bettler and Robert C. Lieberman. And this is from my well-dog-eared copy. I have read this book cover to cover. It's an amazing book. This is from the introduction. When the president used his power to target immigrants, the press, and his political opponents, the sheer overreach of his actions shocked many citizens. Tensions among the nation's political leaders had been escalating for years. Embroiled in one intense conflict after another, both sides had grown increasingly distrustful of each other. Every action by one camp provoked a greater counter-reaction from the other, sometimes straining the limits of the Constitution. Fights and mob violence followed. Leaders of the dominant party grew convinced that their only hope for fixing the government was to do everything possible to weaken their opponents and silence dissent. The president signed into law provisions that made it more difficult for immigrants, who tended to support the opposition, to attain citizenship, and mandated the deportation of those who were deemed dangerous or who came from, quote, hostile, end quote, nations. He then put his pen to a law that would allow for the prosecution of those who openly criticized his administration, such as newspaper publishers. The year just described was not 2017 or 2018. Rather, it was 1798, when President John Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Act. His allies in Congress, the Federalists, argued that these measures were necessary in anticipation of a possible war with France to protect the country from internal spies, subversive elements, and dissent. The Federalists disapproved of immigrants, viewing them as a threat to the purity of our national character. They particularly disliked the Irish, the largest immigrant group, because they largely favored their political opponents, the Republicans, and sympathized with the French. Or as one Federalist congressman put it, there was no need to, quote, invite hordes of wild Irishmen, nor the turbulent and disorderly of all the world, to come here with a basic view to distract our tranquility, end quote. Critics of the new laws raised their voices in protest. The Republicans charged that they amounted to barefaced efforts to weaken their faction, which happened to include most Americans not of English heritage. 2 leading Republicans, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, went so far as to advise state governments to refuse to abide by the Sedition Act, resolving that it was unconstitutional. Political conflicts boiled over into everyday life. Federalists and Republicans often resided in different neighborhoods and attended different churches. Federalists, centered particularly in New England, prized their Anglo-American identity, and even after the Revolution, they retained their affinity for their mother country. Republicans saw themselves as cosmopolitan, cherishing Enlightenment ideals of liberty and equality, and they championed the French Revolution and held disdain for Britain. By 1794, partisans in urban communities were holding separate 4th of July ceremonies. Republicans read aloud the Declaration of Independence, penned by the founder of their party, Thomas Jefferson, as evidence that independence had been their own achievement, while the Federalists offered toasts to their leader, President George Washington. The Republicans viewed themselves as the party of the people. One prominent politician among them chided the Federalists for celebrating not, quote, we the people, but, quote, we the noble, chosen, privileged few, end quote. To many people at the time, the Alien and Sedition Acts bore an unsettling resemblance to the kind of government overreach that spurred them to fight a war for independence just a few decades earlier.
The acts comprised 4 laws, 3 of which placed restrictions on immigrants and appeared to be a strategic attempt to shape the electorate by excluding potential voters for the opposition in order to tip the scales of power. The 4th, the Sedition Act, made it illegal to publish, quote, any false, scandalous, and malicious writing or writings against the government of the United States or either House of Congress of the United States with intent to defame or to bring them into contempt or disrepute, end quote. By denying freedom of speech and freedom of the press, it outlawed criticism of the government and deprived citizens of the opportunity to become more fully informed by hearing alternative points of view. The measures gave the president power to exert control over Americans' lives in ways removed from congressional authority and therefore less accountable to popular control. Some state governments outright refused to abide by the new federal law, intensifying divisions. And on the streets, mock violence, the burning of effigies, was swiftly transformed into the genuine article as politically motivated beatings and open brawls proliferated. In one case, on July 27, 1798, Federalists in New York marched up Broadway singing God Save the King just to antagonize the Republicans. The latter responded by singing French Revolutionary songs. Soon the singing contest gave way to violence as fighting ensued. Watching the growing chaos and divisions, Americans of all stripes worried that their experiment in self-government might not survive the decade. They feared that monarchy would reassert itself, aristocracy would replace representative government, or some states might secede from the Union, causing its demise. The early beginnings of democracy in the United States were fragile, even at a time when some of the Constitution's framers themselves held public office. The book, 4 Threats, by Mettler and Lieberman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Second hour of our program. On the line with us is Guillaume Long. He's a senior policy analyst at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, previously held several cabinet positions in the government of Ecuador, most recently served as Ecuador's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva. He has a PhD in international politics from the University of London and is visiting with us here via electronic means from Brazil. Guillaume, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you with us. What does Lula's victory show? First of all, what does Lula's victory tell us about the politics of Brazil right now?
Oh, thanks very much for having me on the show. I think Lula's victory is the most significant political occurrence in Latin America in a long time, potentially in a number of years. It really consolidates a new shift to progressive governments, to left-of-center governments, if you like, in the region that's been ongoing now for a couple of years. And of Brazil being the largest economy, the biggest, most important demographically speaking, the most important economically speaking. Of course, geographically speaking, it's kind of the big power in the Latin American region. This shift to the left is even more significant. And a lot of governments and a lot of Latin American journalists, governments, political actors, political parties have been watching these elections in Brazil unfold with a lot of attention. What it means is, of course, the demise of a very radical far-right government in Brazil. And it's very interesting because many parallels that can be drawn with the United States, with the return of sort of a broad coalition of democratic governance from sort of the left to the center-right against this far-right message and this far-right government represented by Jair Bolsonaro. But it also means something else, which is maybe less positive. Lula wins with a very, very narrow margin indeed, less than 2 percentage points. He got 50.9 versus 49.1%. So very narrow victory, which also means that Bolsonaro is out. This kind of neo-fascistic government, many have called it like that way, is going to finish on the 1st of of January, there's going to be a transition to a much more democratic form of government. But as a political force, again, mirroring what's happening in the United States, as a political force, the Brazilian far right is very, very strong. And in some regions of Brazil, it's in fact being strengthened. And so it's not going anywhere. The far right is there to stay.
Well, I'm seeing reports that parts of the country are being shut down by Bolsonaro followers in protest. That Bolsonaro is supposed to give a speech today, that there is some speculation that he may be trying to pull a Trump, claiming that the election was stolen from him, that he's not going to leave, that he's trying to get the military to go along with him and basically have a military coup. What's actually the story here?
So that's what he's been doing for the last few months. In fact, he'd warned on several occasions that if he lost the elections, he wouldn't recognize the result. He'd been very clear about this. He said that the only way he could lose the election was there was widespread fraud, et cetera, et cetera. But, in order to pull that kind of rhetoric and have an effect and sort of, essentially orchestrate a coup, which is what he was, de facto arguing, you need support. And you need support. You need either institutional support or you need, the electoral authorities were always sort of defending the electoral process. The military has not supported him. By and large, even people in Bolsonaro's party, so governors who have been elected at the head of various states, because we also had elections at the state level for governors on Sunday. Many of his, people close to Bolsonaro have actually recognized the presidential elections, recognized the presidential result, because, of course, putting the elections into question would question their own election, right? So a lot of people have deserted Bolsonaro in terms of his fraud narrative. So he's very much on his own. But what's even more interesting is that he hasn't done either. He hasn't recognized the results. He hasn't come out to congratulate Lula on his victory, but he hasn't, cried fraud either. He's basically, since Sunday, nobody knows really where Bolsonaro is. Well, we kind of know that he's in the presidential palace, but a lot of speculation whether he's locked up in a room. He's basically not said anything. He's not tweeted. He's not given any media declaration. He's disappeared. He's off the radar. And so, of course, if you're going to, push for this kind of coup outcome, you would expect him to be mobilizing his base. You would expect him to have come out on the evening of the elections denouncing what he would have seen as foul play. He hasn't done any of that. He's basically gone up. Nobody knows. The main newspaper in Brazil today, Folha de São Paulo, the largest newspaper, sort of called it sort of a childish, teenage behavior, sort of a tantrum. Nobody knows what's going on. So apparently he's going to come out and speak today. We'll have to see what he says. But by and large, I think institutions, whether it's the military, civilian institution, the political system, the courts, are all behind the electoral results. I really can't see how the results could be overturned. There have, as you said, been a few protests. Some of Bolsonaro's supporters have come out on the streets, but not in large numbers. In fact, the biggest disruption are truck drivers who have blocked a few key highways. Truck drivers are famously pro-Bolsonaro in Brazil for a number of reasons, including the fact that he eliminated speed cameras and got rid of taxes on fuel and so on and so forth. But so obviously truck drivers have big capacity for disruption. They park their trucks across the highways and it creates a lot of disruption. But the police have been loyal. They're clearing the truck drivers off the highways with tear gas today. The military has been absolutely loyal to the electoral results. I can't see him going anywhere with this sort of January 6th strategy. Very
good news. Now, here in the United States, in 1964 was the year that the Republican Party in the United States rolled out a campaign arguing that there was massive voter fraud across the country and that Barry Goldwater losing the election, would be or was a consequence of that, and using that voter fraud rhetoric as an excuse to really clamp down on, in particular, black voting in the South. This has been amplified election after election in the 58 years since then, to the point that Donald Trump was able to weaponize it very, very effectively, and we've got some between 200 and 300 Republican candidates running for political office right now in the United States who openly are saying that our elections are fraudulent, they can't be trusted. And, you can't have a democracy if people don't trust the central core of it, which is the election. So we've had this 58-year campaign in the United States to get Americans comfortable with this idea that the Democrats steal elections, essentially. Has there been a parallel to that in Brazil? How does Brazil keep track of who can and cannot vote? And how long has, you said Bolsonaro has been talking about election fraud, how long has that kind of rhetoric been ricocheting around that country?
Yeah, so there has been a parallel to that, but it's much more recent. It doesn't go back to the 60s. Well, first of all, Brazil was a dictatorship between exactly 1964. You mentioned that date, 1985. It was a return to democracy after 1985. And since then, really, and that's true throughout Latin America, but particularly in Brazil, the electoral system has been significantly strengthened. It even became a pride for Brazil because it was one of the sort of first, it's an electronic voting system. So Brazilians, since the late 80s and completely since the early 90s, have been voting on machines, which they were very proud of, contrary to the rest of Latin America, which is still ballots. It's an electronic voting system. I was actually an electoral observer on Sunday, and the checks and the controls and the audits of the machines, and it's really quite sophisticated. And throughout Latin America, democratization in the 80s and 90s, you were talking about voter suppression. Democratization was really a move towards universal suffrage with a lot of political will, and I would say on all sides of the political spectrum, to do the reverse than what you were describing. So no voter suppression, to encourage voters to vote. In fact, in Brazil, voting is compulsory. So, the reverse.
So everybody votes. Everybody must vote.
Well, not everybody votes, because there's always a small percentage of abstention, people in extremely rural areas, or people who just don't want to vote.
Right.
But, then in order to get a passport, or there are a few things, sort of official documents that you can't get without paying a fine if you haven't voted, right? So you're very much encouraged. In a number of Latin American countries, it's like that. In fact, in a number of European countries as well.
Sure.
So voting is compulsory. You can, of course, not vote, but then you'll have a small fine if you want to, renew some ID or various things that you can't get without your voting certificate. So no, the reverse of voter suppression. Now, it is true that for the last 4 years, Bolsonaro has been in power for 4 years. He has created that narrative that we were talking about of making people doubt of the voting system. So you have increasingly a parallel narrative, a fake news narrative, very similar again from the United States.
Guillaume, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but it's an amazing story. Thank you so much for dropping by and sharing it with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Guillaume Long, Guillaume's Twitter handle is GUILLAUME Long, or CEPRDC. And welcome back, Renee in Elgin, Illinois. Hey, Renee, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
I can. What's up?
Yeah. I don't. It probably has come up somewhere before, but you know how with the election outcome challenges, how is that paid for? Because I'm just imagining from the bits and pieces of these things that I hear in the news that a lot of it is directly associated with whatever local provisions there are to handle voting and tallying and things like that. But generally speaking, how is that being paid for? Because it just seems to me like as people sit down at their kitchen tables to go over their budgets, they're not picturing somebody sitting there with an empty bucket that needs to be filled up as a slush fund from their taxes to, to fund the outrageous indignation of, oh, I didn't win and I think there's a problem. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I think people might have a different perspective on the whole thing if they were to understand how, if somebody else is paying for that challenge, I'm going to challenge till the cows come home.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
In those states where Republicans control official power, in many cases, the challenges to elections are coming from the state itself. They're using tax dollars to launch these challenges. On the other hand, in states where Republicans don't control, and therefore cannot use official power to do this, you've got a hodgepodge of groups. There are some PACs and super PACs, some of them funded by right-wing billionaires in the United States, others a little more grassroots, some of them affiliated loosely with the Republican Party, who have some of them, connected to just, plain old flat out, nutty groups, QAnon kind of groups that are sponsoring these kinds of things. Some of them, like, John Eastman, I mean, he's turned this into an industry now. He's running around the country giving speeches and collecting money. Mike Lindell. I mean, there's a bunch of them. It's a minor business, and one that actually makes a lot of money for some of these folks. So.
Yeah, that's what I suspected.
There we go. Yep.
Okay. All right. Long time, first time. I love your show, Tom.
Okay. Thanks, Renee. Great to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
Ron in San Diego. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Yes. You justly criticized the way Democrats message. And one example that I think that they've fallen into the way Republicans do on requesting of abortion. They say abortion on demand. That's, some of them are probably very meekly requesting abortion or in a normal tone of voice. But abortion on demand, when you demand things, it's sometimes a little rude.
Yeah, it's a pejorative. Absolutely. The other half of that lie is that they'll say abortion on demand up to the day of birth, which is, like I said, another lie. That literally doesn't happen. And unless mom's about to die, I mean, if you have to make a choice between the life of the baby and the life of mom, typically you choose the life of mom. But those are terrible, tragic circumstances that just rip people up, and to politicize them is just wrong, in my opinion. Ron, thank you for the call, and your point is very well taken. Language is important. Words matter. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. NBC journalists are finally taking on Republican talking points. Finally, after 58 years. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So finally, I mean, this is like good news. Egberto Willies writing over at DailyKos.com. At last, NBC journalists knock GOP strategists' attempt to make GOP violence equivalent to protest. And it's brilliant. Brad Todd is a Republican strategist, and he was on an NBC program with Kimberly Atkins Storr and one other person. I'll get to that name in just a moment. But anyhow, Brad Todd tried to basically say that this guy attacking Paul Pelosi, that the political violence that we're seeing across the United States, the threats of violence that we're seeing across the United States, he says, in the end, we have a mental health crisis. We need to talk about that. So Kimberly Atkins Storr, who was the NBC news person who was interviewing him, said, "You want to address the internet? I think one of the clearest examples we saw on January 6th is when Donald Trump finally told the people at the Capitol to stand down, and they did immediately. These are people reacting to messages that they are getting, and they have been getting consistently. And if you look at the political messaging that's coming out, you do not see Democrats threatening violence. You don't see them holding guns." So then Todd tries to use examples of protesters shouting at politicians in restaurants. Remember, I think Ted Cruz was the recipient of one of these. And so Garrett Haake, who was also on with Storr, NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake, he says in response, "Hitting pots and pans in the neighborhood or telling someone they're not welcome in a restaurant is not the same as going into their home and hitting them with a hammer. Protest is not the same thing as violence." Thank God. Finally, the media is starting to talk back. If they had only started in 1964 when this whole voter fraud lie began, when it became the official policy of the Republican Party to promote this, we might be in a very different place. And isn't it amazing what Guillaume Long said about voter fraud in Brazil, that nobody is worried about that, although Bolsonaro has been pushing it for 4 years, echoing Trump. But Brazil's quite proud of their democracy. They've only had it since 1985.
and and it works, and you are required to vote if you want to get a driver's license or anything else that requires the government to sign off on it. You have to prove that you voted. By the way, this is not unique to Brazil. Voting is compulsory in Australia. I believe there are several European countries. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I believe that there are several where it's compulsory. And this whole idea of voter fraud, just by and large, as I said in the first hour, by and large does not exist in most other developed democracies, advanced democracies. It's not even an issue. Because, I mean, who's going to be stupid enough to risk going to prison to cast one vote out of millions? It's just, nobody's going to do that. And like I said, if somebody tries to do it at scale, they get caught every single time. So, in fact, the only example that we know of in the last couple of years was this Republican in North Carolina who was going around buying mail-in ballots from people in a trailer park, and he got busted because you can't keep a secret like that. So, bottom line, there's no voter fraud. But the Republicans, for 58 years, have been wanting us to think there was, so that they could use that myth to tighten the screws on the laws about who could vote and under what circumstances they could vote. And the consequence of that is that we are the only developed democracy in the world that has restrictive voting regulations. Where, down in Florida, the League of Women Voters has stopped doing voter registration drives because they've basically criminalized signing people up to vote. You've got Ron DeSantis' election police now arresting, ex-felons who thought that they could vote because, hey, 2 years ago, the state all voted to let ex-felons vote. But then DeSantis and the Republicans changed the rules again on them, and nobody told them. And in fact, in most of these people who were arrested by DeSantis' election police, most of them were black, and most of them had been told by the parole officers or by election officials that, sure, you can vote. You paid your dues to society. We changed the law. That, just the absurdity of this. There's nothing even close to this, not even remotely close to this in Germany or France or Sweden or Norway or Switzerland or, the United Kingdom. I mean, in most of these countries, you just show up at the polls and say, here's my ID, here's my passport or my driver's license, here's my ID, and, you vote. It's that simple. You don't have to pre-qualify. You don't get kicked out if you ever got convicted of a felony. You can't be refused a vote because you haven't paid fines. Nobody's asking you to count jelly beans in a jar or recite the Constitution. This was William Rehnquist's thing back in 1964, in that election in 1964, to stop voter fraud. William Rehnquist in South Phoenix was at a polling place where he was asking every single black person who came in to recite a portion of the Constitution and explain what it meant. And if they couldn't do it, Rehnquist would not let them vote. This is the guy that Reagan put on the Supreme Court, or maybe it was Nixon put on the Supreme Court, and Reagan made him Chief Justice, if my recollection is accurate. And then in 2000, he's the guy who handed the White House to George W. Bush. It's crazy.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of commander-in-chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all, and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology, as you might guess. And it continues from there. The book is The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. And welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls here. We got a lot to talk about. The elections, the polling. Is it your sense that the polling is accurate? How to talk back to Republicans? Can you vote? How do we change our voting systems? Randy in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, great show again. It's fascinating what happened down in Brazil. That was very interesting.
I agree.
And it is. Maybe there's hope left. The reason I'm calling is related to what happened in Brazil. I've become intrigued by what you've had to say about there's going to be a blue wave this November. And I'm convinced you're right. The polls are wrong. They're made by random phone calls, and they're just missing large sections of our people. And my personal observation is we have a construction company. And we get many emails from our website from people asking us to call them. They're expecting us to call them. So we call them, but most people don't answer the phone anymore. And especially the younger people and especially women don't answer the phone when you just call them, even when they're expecting us to call.
Right.
They don't recognize our number, I suppose.
Right, and so you just wait for the voicemail to come through, and then you call back.
Yeah, they call us right back, exactly. The people who do answer the phone are the older, white, retired people, which are 80% Republican.
Yeah.
Down.
I don't know that they're 80%, but probably in Alabama they are, yeah.
Well, at least 80% here. But that's my observation, and I'm convinced there really is going to be a blue wave this November, and I sure hope so.
Yeah, I think so too, Randy. I think that... we'll see. I suspect that there's going to be some really close elections, but I think that, I'm very optimistic. Randy, thank you for the call. Thanks for the information. Claudia in Rochester, Michigan. Hey, Claudia, what's up?
Hi there, Tom. I'm happy today because I got tired of the lackluster messaging of our establishment Democratic Party, so I made my own sign. And I put it on a whiteboard, easel, and it says, vote for democracy, not for bullies, liars, and bigots. Wow. I had the best response last night. Everybody, people took pictures of it.
Where'd you put this sign, Claudia?
Right in my front yard.
Wow. Okay.
And then a couple, people said something to me. They're all tired of the violence. I had one woman who went by and saw my sign and wouldn't let her kids come to my door. So when they were next door in my sweet 100-pound, 71-year-old grandma body, I said, I have candy here too. So they came over, and she let them trick or treat, but she wouldn't come in my yard.
Oh, my.
And so... I know. But everybody else after that, even a little 7-year-old said, who are you going to vote for? I said, well, personally, I'm voting Democrat, but everybody should vote, young man. It's the duty of an American citizen. And every time people left, I said, happy Halloween. Be sure to vote, no matter how you vote. But the response to my sign so made me feel better today.
That's great news, Claudia.
Yeah, I just wish our Democratic Party would be more out there,
Yeah. Well,
so
they're lacking
the three words.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just said those were the 3 words I chose because they're all true. I even looked up bigots to make sure that I was right on what that means. And so I just wanted to share my happiness today with people who are as fed up with this hateful, violent Republican MAGA party. And, and put my feelings out there, and I'm so glad I did.
Well, good on you, Claudia. That is absolutely wonderful. And you, once again, what your sign that you put out in your front yard said was?
Vote for democracy, not for bullies, liars, or bigots.
Bingo. Claudia, thank you. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate it. Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, it's always good to talk to you. And first off, I love you. I look up to you, and I always look forward to listening to your show. I know we've had many conversations in the last couple of years, and I do agree with you that I think that you're right, that the Republicans just they don't want their base to be defranchised. But I'm going to make a couple points here, okay? If by chance if we lose the House or Senate or any part of it, who do we start blaming? Because I'm going to be honest with you, the Democratic Party has had an opportunity since Parkland to gain a young voter. The young voters are wanting somewhere to go. And the Democratic Party is just sitting on their hands, and it makes me sick. It makes me sick that this is an opportunity for them to gain more voters. And you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And
I do. I mean, the flip side of that is that young people under 30 vote at about half the rate of people over 50. And so, if you're a party that has very, very limited financial resources, do you put your money into gun control for the people under 30, or do you put it into, protecting Social Security and Medicare for the people over 50?
Right, but I disagree with you because we had young voters, and I know you're going to be happy when I say this, but when the Democrats rigged the primaries in 2006, and I don't want Bernie to run. I just make it very, very clear. Yeah. Bernie had his opportunity, that's it. But the thing is, though, is that the young voters got stung, and they have a bad taste in their mouth of the Democratic Party when they did, because they had a place to go.
Yeah,
they were young voters.
And that was a terrible situation, and good on Donna Brazile for devoting a whole chapter to her autobiography to essentially apologizing for it, because she was running the DNC at the time. Bernie got screwed. I don't disagree. I'm not sure he would have necessarily won the primary. I think probably he would have, but I can't say that certainly. But that's the past, and we really right now we have a battle between literal fascism and democracy, and in terms of who to blame if Democrats go down in flames in this election, I think that's a conversation that we should probably begin having after the election rather than in advance of it, Casey. I'm not ready to begin that process. Casey, thanks for the call. Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Hey, Gloria, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
I'm well. What's up?
I just I wanted to inform everybody everyone out there that the Republicans are doing the stuff that they're doing. A lot of times we don't even notice it. As far as voter irregularities and stuff like that. For instance, our ballots in North Carolina, okay, we have 2 national races, which is the Senate and, the House races. But our ballots are supposed to be in alphabetical order. We have each race, and each race is in alphabetical order. Do you know that our Senate race for the primary and the ballots today, the general election ballots, they are the Sherry Beasley, for instance, is the Democrat that's running, and in the primary ballot and the general ballot, her name is way down near the bottom of the little list because we have some little weird parties running.
Like the Libertarians and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But they got Sherry Beasley, and she's the name. Even the guy she's running against, Republican she's running against, Ted Budd, he would be after her, but he's before her.
Yeah.
And people need to pay attention to these little things because if you go over there and you pop over there and look at the list, Ted Budd is at the top of the list. Sherry Beasley should be at the top of the list unless these people don't know the ABCs.
Well, in some states, they've actually passed laws saying that it's alphabetical for state elections. It's whichever party controls the state, that party has first ranking for federal elections. That may well be the case in
in North Carolina. Other.
North Carolina, they're supposed to be in alphabetical order.
You're sure of that? Okay.
Everything else on the ballot is alphabetical order, except for that one race.
Wow.
And it was the same way in the on the primary ballot. She was at the bottom of the list, and there was about 7 of them on there. She was at the bottom of the list in the primary, but everybody else up above her was in alphabetical order.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that your Secretary of State who runs your elections is a Republican, right?
No, he's a Secretary of State's a Democrat, but I think his assistant or something other is somehow another is a Republican main.
Yeah, something's rotten in Denmark here, Gloria, as Shakespeare said. Gloria, thank you for the call. I hope you all can work it out there, and I hope that Sherry Beasley wins the election because she's a great candidate. It's 44 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're talking about the elections, the fate and future of them, democracy in America. Your thoughts? And welcome back. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's up?
Before I say what I have to say, I have to apologize to you, to the audience. A week ago, I used the H word, and after, I felt ashamed, and I need to apologize.
Apology accepted.
And to the Catholic people that practice the Catholic faith, to them as well, because my mother was 100 black belt. So anyway, what you touched on, on the voting, the intimidation, here where I live, I grew up with violence. And then we had the Nazi party making phone calls, again, intimidation. So what I mean, my fear got to me, and that's part of my journey to reverse it. Your show is about love, right, and the truth. What you say about fascism against democracy, I go further, a spiritual war between the truth and a lie. It's hard to believe how much power a lie has, Tom. Yeah. And
I think it is spiritual warfare that we're experiencing right now. I really do.
Yeah, because people don't think with their hearts. I grew up in a bad way, but I didn't give in to the dark side. I could have easily, but somehow somebody was looking after me. I don't know why. Your show was part of that, of my journey, your audience. You know what I mean? I respect them, and I learn. I'm learning. My school is a Thom Hartmann, believe it or not. I tell my wife that.
Well, thank you, Bobby.
I'm grateful for that, and I thank you for taking my call. And people have the courage, like that grandmother in Arizona. They wouldn't intimidate me. My fear is try it, but I'm grateful I'm in California. So let's pray for the nation, okay? The world, not just America.
You've got it, Bobby.
The world, Mother Earth. Okay, Tom?
Okay, thanks a lot, Bobby. Great to hear from you. Appreciate it. Beverly in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Beverly, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I can't make sense out of this. I know you have said that the Secretary of State can move forward a Republican, even though he doesn't win the popular vote.
I don't. Wait a minute. I'm not sure what you're talking about here, Beverly.
Well, you said that secretaries of state can put forward as elector a Republican.
Oh, you're talking the Electoral College. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. What's happened is there's a couple of states now. It's not the Secretary of State. It's the legislature. And in the Constitution, it says that these individual state legislatures, with regard to the Electoral College, shall determine the time and manner of choosing the electors. Whether it's going to be, in the case of the 2020 election, a Trump elector or a Biden elector, for example, that it's up to the legislature. Well, all 50 states' legislatures have come up with rules by passing laws. In 48 states, it's whoever carries the majority of the vote in that state. All of the state's electors go for that person. In Nebraska and in Maine, they split the state in two. So they've got, basically two parts that do that.
But what has happened is that in the last couple of years, in the last year basically, several states have changed those laws to say that the legislature can simply, if they don't like the outcome of the election, they can simply appoint their own electors. That's what I was talking about, Beverly. Did I clarify for you?
Yeah, I just don't know why there's not a federal law that wouldn't not let that happen.
Because of the Constitution. This is all, within the context of the Constitution. Beverly, I have to run. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Welcome back. 49 minutes past the hour. Wynn in Portland. Hey, Wynn, what's up?
Hey, I worked elections in 3 different counties, and I just wanted to set the record straight. The ballots are always in different order every time. They're never right in alphabetical order. They mix them up so that nobody gets favored just because of how their last name's spelled.
Here in Oregon?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, because it varies from state to state. But,
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Wynn.
Anyway. Okay, you have a good day.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the call. Petri in Seattle. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah, Petri, you got that right. So I'm actually driving from California back to Washington, and I appreciate your phone screener identifying that. Hey, are you still in California? Well, so I'm from California originally, and I live in Washington now. So from the Bay Area to Seattle, both left-wing, left state, the whole liberalism of those 2 cities. And so you were talking about Florida, and you were criticizing DeSantis for changing election laws and felons that can vote. And then you spun off and started quoting European countries and how they ID people and how easy that would be. Well, okay, listen to this. So from California, they don't check IDs when you vote. You just walk in and you can say, my name's Joe Blow, and they got you on the list, and you can vote for that person.
They confirm signatures, Petri. They confirm signatures, and signatures are harder to fake than IDs. You can buy a fake ID for $25. You cannot forge a signature successfully in front of another person.
That doesn't justify anything. And then
I'm not justifying. I'm telling you, it's a more secure system. Biometrics are more secure than fake IDs. If you want the most secure voting system in the world, you have people confirm their identity by fingerprint or by signature, because you can't fake those.
And by the way, I'm dual citizen, so I have my EU passport in addition to my foreign American passport. And so, quoting those countries as if you're like using the ID as some valid point to criticize what's going on in Florida. Well, let me just remind you that in California, Proposition 8 got voted yes, banning gay marriage, but they didn't like that. The voters voted against gay marriage. And what did those liberals do right away? They just overturned it. They didn't care what
I don't think it was liberals. I think it was the Supreme Court, was it not?
No, it was California.
I know, it was the California Supreme Court, wasn't it?
That's what I point. Californians, the Democrat leftist cabal.
The Democrat leftist cabal. Okay, Petri.
Yeah,
so, we're wandering from grievance to grievance here, but I think I'm gonna move along. Petri, thanks for the call. Next time you call, hopefully there'll be a little less road noise. It was frankly, it was hard to hear you. Maurice in Miami. Hey, Maurice, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing there?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, listen, everybody's kind of like hand-wringing over the, maybe Kerry in Arizona is getting a little bit of a surge here, or some Republicans are, coming even with some of the Democrats and some of these MAGA candidates, blah, blah, blah. But I know we've got the secret weapon of very ticked off women who've gotten their reproductive rights taken away, and I think that's going to play big in the election, just as it did in Kansas. People were like, their jaws dropped in Kansas. when they had that referendum.
Well, and the early voting numbers tend to support that theory, Maurice.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a blue wave. You know, Michael Moore said it, and he was right about Trump getting elected, even though nobody could believe it.
Yeah.
And he's saying there's going to be a blue wave, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think the thing that's fascinating is how these 5 or 6, I guess it's 6 polling companies who are either aligned with or use methods that align with the Republican Party are basically skewing the polls, and I think setting a lot of Republicans up, like probably our last caller, to be in a state of just frenzied outrage when Republicans lose many of these elections. So, it's...
I don't know if we can trust those poll companies anymore.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that even they can trust themselves anymore. I mean, the methodology has gotten really, really sketchy. Maurice, thanks for the call. Bob in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I want to give you a heads up on some GOP shenanigans here in West North Carolina. I remember a time when all the signage, all the political signage, always the Republicans use red on their signs, kind of identify what they are. We're always blue. Mm-hmm. They shy away from red. They don't want any red on their signs. They're making them all blue so they confuse you.
And they're not using the word Republican either, are they?
No, here, and I've got the local newspaper, and there are 2 lists in this local newspaper. One of them is the Democratic. It says specifically Democratic candidates 2022. All the lists there of our candidates. And at the bottom it has the email contact and the website for them. And you go 3 or 4 pages over, it says official 2022 voter guide for responsible citizens. It's got the whole list of the Republicans. But it doesn't say Republican anywhere on it. It's in yellow.
Right.
And it doesn't give any contact information for their party.
Yeah, it's just like the ads that they're running for Christine Drazen, who's the Republican candidate for governor here in Oregon. They've got a gay guy, a black guy, and a kind of granola woman, pitching, and they never once mentioned the word Republican. Not once.
And they were handing out these yellow sheets of official voter guide at the precinct last week.
Yeah.
Not identifying who they are or what they stand for.
Yeah.
So a lot of people might just be confused. That's the guide.
I think that's illegal. It's.
It should be, but this is North Carolina.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Bob, thanks for the heads up.
Tom.
Yeah. Good to hear from you. I appreciate it. John in Phoenix. Hey, John, we have a little less than a minute before the end of the hour. You got a quick one?
It's a quick one, Tom. I find it astonishing that a federal judge in Arizona says it's okay to have a machine gun and intimidate people in front of a voting place.
Right, but you can't give people water if they're standing in line. You go to jail for that.
Right, so it's just absolutely astonishing. And the last thing I want to say, food for thought, maybe for your next article you write that I love reading every morning. It's amazing that we have a terrorist party that's allowed to be in the U.S. Government.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to call the Republican Party terrorists, although many of the people who follow them are proud of being terrorists. They're trying to spread terror. I'm hopeful that the Republican Party will wake up, that reasonable Republicans will take it back, and we can get back to debating whether we should have tax cuts or not, and whether we should have tariffs.
Tom, the last thing I want to say is I love it when people say, oh, he's a good Republican. It's like, well, no, if you're a good person, you'd be a Democrat.
Yeah.
End of story.
Okay. John, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM there in Phoenix. Wow. Hitting the top of the hour here on the other side of the break. New Hampshire Republican Don Baldock, the guy who's running for United States Senate, he actually believes that schools all across New Hampshire have kitty litter boxes in their classrooms for students who identify as cats. I got to tell you about this. This is hysterical.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Storm is Here, An American Crucible by Luke Mogelson. This is from the introduction. Hoping to stave off an encroaching despair on the morning of January 7th, 2021, I left my hotel in Washington, D.C. and took a taxi to the Lincoln Memorial. I was looking for sanctuary, and an open-air chamber designed to resemble a temple seemed as likely a place to find it as any. I'd been there once or twice before, passing between the marble columns. You weren't humbled into silence as much as welcomed by it. When I arrived this time, however, the monument was closed. Squad cars were pulling up, officers expelling a braying crowd, a mob, excuse me. Many of the people wore red MAGA hats and Trump 2020 shirts. I asked someone what had happened. It seemed that a woman had been posing for pictures with a Gadsden flag, "Don't tread on me," below a hissing snake on a yellow field, when an officer advised that such displays were not allowed. A fracas had ensued, and now the Trump supporters converged at the bottom of the steps, the same steps from which, in 1963, Martin Luther King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, and the crowd then began calling the officers Nazis, Marxists, and pigs. Young men in blazers waved their middle fingers. "Christ is king," they chanted. "Aren't we the pussies?" a little bald man asked. "Honestly, we're not overrunning them?" "That's when they start executing people," said a woman in her 30s, glaring hatefully at the police. It occurred to me that some of the officers impassively absorbing this abuse probably had friends in the hospital. Less than 24 hours earlier, I had watched Donald Trump tell a similar, though much larger mob assembled on the far end of the reflecting pool that extended behind us, quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore," end quote. Thousands of people, many armed with bats, clubs, whips, and other rudimentary weapons, had proceeded to march up the National Mall. At the Capitol, they had wounded around 180 law enforcement agents, smashed through doors and windows, and frantically hunted for politicians determined to sabotage the peaceful transition of power. Some carried nooses, barked racial epithets, assaulted journalists, and called for the vice president to be lynched. On the Senate floor, I watched Trump supporters ransack desks and steal confidential documents. A bare-chested man in a horned headdress wielding a spear pronounced Mike Pence an effing traitor. Then he led the rioters in prayer. An officer who suffered a stroke after being maced would later die. Now it was not the police, but the Trump supporters who were outraged. Once again, they believed they'd been wronged. Once again, their sense of injury was blistering. The woman with the Gadsden flag was a pastor from Los Angeles. "I know that had to be Antifa," she said of the attack on the Capitol. "I know it did, because everyone here," she gestured at the livid crowd berating the police, "there's such a spirit of community." She began to weep. "How dare they?" she demanded of the officers. "What is wrong with this country? This is not my America. I don't understand." That made two of us. I could think of only one question to ask. Where do we go from here? The pastor wiped her tears. Her suffering was vast. "I will tell you this," she sobbed. "I will not turn the other cheek to what's not right. This is not right. This is not right." The first epidemic I reported on was in West Africa in 2014. Although Ebola was far more deadly and contagious than COVID-19, the international response is inadequate. Liberia's largest slum, a dense warren of crude squatter dwellings in a narrow peninsula that jutted into the Atlantic from downtown Monrovia, was a formidable early hot zone. Below a canopy of rusty sheet metal, some 80,000 denizens lacked running water, relieved themselves in the cramped gaps between walls, and repurposed detritus as a bulwark against eroding riverbanks. As the virus wiped out whole families, the Liberian military sealed off the encampments with ramparts and barbed wire. Gunships patrolled the coast. Crime spiked. Panic spread. Soldiers fired on people trying to escape. The community looked doomed. After 10 days, emissaries from the slum prevailed on the government to end the blockade. In exchange, they agreed to implement a suite of precautions, identifying and isolating sick people in their homes, tracking down their recent contacts, and vigilantly monitoring each individual for a period of 3 weeks, the maximum amount of time that the virus was known to incubate before manifesting symptoms. Normally, all this should have been the responsibility of medical professionals and epidemiologists. In the slum, though, the job fell to locals. Against most expectations, within a month, the Ebola outbreak had been contained. Monrovia was not an aberration. In the absence of rescue by the world and their own governments, which were among the poorest on the earth, West Africans proved remarkably adept at helping one another to survive. Neighborhoods mobilized, healthcare workers volunteered, secluded villages formed ad hoc task forces to oversee sanitation, quarantines, and mandatory social distancing. Education was crucial. Initially, conspiracy theories abounded. Some West Africans embraced a rumor that the virus was a ploy to solicit foreign donor money. Spiritual healers proffered metaphysical explanations for the vagaries of death and illness. In one remote hamlet I visited in Sierra Leone, the chief had been told that somewhere a commercial plane had crashed. For every passenger who died, a villager must as well. The book, The Storm is Here, by Luke Mogelson.
From powerful political organizations like the AFL-CIO. Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan J. Robinson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. We've covered a lot of territory here. Will America have a free and fair vote or a government chosen through violence? This 1964 harpoon pointed at the heart, the beating heart of our democracy, our voting system, is bearing fruit now 58 years later. We talked about that at some length in the first hour. Also, GOPers continue to flood the zone with lying polls. They're not really lying polls. What they're doing, there's the 5 or 6 polling companies that are affiliated with the Republican Party or use methodology that always skews Republican. And their numbers, their polls are skewing the 538 polls. And so you've got Republicans all over the country who are expecting a red wave, and if you look at the nonpartisan polls, the ones that are not affiliated with Fox News or the Republican Party, they're showing the Democrats are doing really well. So it's like, are we setting up for even more political violence when Republicans lose? So we got into that in the first hour, and also another Democratic politician has been attacked. This man was beaten unconscious in his own backyard, just running for the State House in Pennsylvania. We talked about that in the first hour. Guillaume Long dropped by in the second hour, and we were talking about the situation down in Brazil, where voting is compulsory. There's no all these voting restrictions like we have in the United States, like, hey, you voted in the wrong place, so we're not going to count your vote, or you're a felon and so you can't vote, or your voter registration got canceled by the governor, so you can't vote. None of that in Brazil. None of that in any other developed country, for that matter. We're the only country in the world that does this. It's all a vestige of, it all goes back to the 50s, 60s, and before that, really in the South, to efforts to keep black people from voting in the United States. That's why we have voter registration. That's why we have all these restrictive voter registration laws. So anyhow, Guillaume Long dropped by and filled us in on what's going on in the Brazil election, and of course NBC finally no longer tolerating whataboutism from Republicans trying to say that political violence and political protest are the same thing. They're not. But it's getting, we've got stories here, and I'd love to hear your stories about what's happening in your community with regard to the election, what kind of signs you're seeing, what kind of enthusiasm you're seeing, what's your sense of how things are going to turn out, who's going to be, elected, who's going to be winning the elections in your community. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, and also your take on the political advertising that you're seeing. Is it effective? Is it ineffective? Either party. But anyhow, I have stories, just a couple of quick stories to share with you from the ridiculous to the sublime. In New Hampshire, the race for United States Senate is between Maggie Hassan, who is the Democratic incumbent, and Don Baldock, who is the Trump-humping Republican challenger. And Baldock he was a retired Army general. He gave a speech a couple of days ago, last week in New Hampshire, where he said that, I wish I was making this up, right? Yeah, he was making it up. Well, actually, he wasn't making it up. He was believing this bizarre story that Republicans have been promoting all over the country, that there are young people in our public schools who want to identify as animals rather than humans. And I mean, there is this furry thing, adults who like to dress up, just like Trekkies, they dress up like Star Trek people. These people dress up like animals. But this is not happening in our public schools. But he said it was, and that these young people who identify as cats want to have kitty litter boxes, and they're having to put them in the backs of the classrooms, which is just a complete fantasy. It's a fabrication. It was probably started as a joke. But here you've got a Republican candidate for the United States Senate, a serious candidate who has a very good chance of being the next senator from New Hampshire, promoting this. And in fact, he named a school. So the Pinkerton Academy, a high school with around 3,300 students, said, "We want to assure our community that Mr. Baldock's statements are entirely untrue." This is what he had said. He said, "Guess what? We have fuzzies and furries in classrooms. They lick themselves. They're cats. When they don't like something, they hiss. People walk down the hallway and they jump out. And get this. They're putting litter boxes, right? Litter boxes for that." We're also seeing this in Colorado. A Republican candidate for governor, Heidi Ganahl, claimed several times that schools are being inundated with students choosing absurd identities, claiming kids are identifying as cats. This is a person running for governor of the state of Colorado. Heidi said, "It sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it's happening all over Colorado, and schools are tolerating it. It's insane." No, it's not happening anywhere. Nowhere in America. This is what happens when you go down the GOP rabbit hole on Facebook and Twitter and other kinds of social media. I mean, this is how insane it gets. On the other hand, there's and also here, this is Doug Mastriano has been accused of being anti-Semitic. He's got, ex-Nazis and whatnot, or maybe active Nazis, I don't know, working on his campaign. Certainly Trump humping, or it is alleged he has people with Nazi beliefs working on his campaign. I can't make that as an assertion on my own here. But as a result of that, these claims that he's friendly with Nazis, shall we say. There was a question that was asked in Lancaster County at a campaign rally of Doug Mastriano. And Will Bunch is writing about this in the Philadelphia, the Inquirer, I believe, or the Gazette. In any case, Will Bunch is writing about it. And he notes that a person, asked this question, are you anti-Semitic, or words to that effect? And Mastriano says, yeah, so, and then he kind of freezes up, and his wife jumps in, Rebbe Mastriano, and she asked to grab the mic from her husband, and she said, we are, actually, I've just lost my quote here, which is rather distressing. She went off on this rant about how we are super, 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 friendly to to Israel. We're more, and basically it's this whole religious Christian thing about, we're waiting for fire to come out of the sky and 144,000 Jews will be left and that's it, and they'll all convert to Christianity and then the world. So anyway, it was here we go. Despite that, founder Andrew Torba's history of outrageous anti-Jewish remarks, Mastriano campaign paid Gab $5,000 for promotion. And of course, he's running against a Jewish candidate, Josh Shapiro, so surprise, surprise. So there's that. But here's where it gets really amazing. In Italy, this story in Italy is just breathtaking. Italy just elected basically a hard right, almost Nazi new prime minister. And the opposition has been warning about this. Well, the Italian government now just passed a law with a jail sentence of up to 6 years and a fine of 10,000 euros, $11,000, for organizers of illegal parties of more than 50 people. Now, what's an illegal party? Nobody knows. When there was a party, an event at Benito Mussolini's birthplace on the anniversary of his death, I believe it was, there were 2,000 people who showed up. It was a party celebrating Mussolini and his fascism. And the government didn't do anything about that. But on the other hand, there was a party, a rave, in the northern Italian city of Modena, and some of the ravers were saying liberal things into the microphone, and police confiscated their audio equipment worth 150,000 euros. And the Democratic deputy Elena Malavasi said on Tuesday, "Who decides what's dangerous? A rave or a gathering of black shirts who insulted our Constitution?" Also, the new prime minister has just appointed a new, I want to get this title right, to the government, the deputy infrastructure minister. His name is Galeazzo Bignami. And surprise, surprise, Galeazzo was photographed just a couple years ago wearing a Nazi armband with a swastika. And he's now the infrastructure minister for the country of Italy, where they just gave the government the authority to come in and arrest you if you bring more than 50 people together for any purpose that the government doesn't like. And the Italians are going, yeah, okay, so we voted for a fascist, but we didn't really expect a fascist? There's a lesson for us here in America with this situation. We'll be right back. It's 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls right after this break. Stick around. And welcome back. Wendy in Pataskala, Ohio. Hey, Wendy, what's up?
That's right. You got it right.
Yeah. We got it spelled phonetically here. That's why.
Okay. First, I want to thank you for talking about the polls, because watching Kornacki on MSNBC is very demoralizing. I mean, it really is. It's really getting to me. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up was that talking about the signs, let me tell you something funny. Vance has got blue letters on a white background, okay? And now Tim Ryan has blue letters on a red background.
Oh, wow. But J.D. Vance is not using the Republican logo colors, and is he using the word Republican in his ads or on his signs?
Nope, just the word. Now, just his last name. But what's funny is the first time I saw Tim Ryan I guess I've already come to expect that Republicans are using blue more and more. I mean, you don't really see them using red anymore. Not really for at least the last year or so, maybe 2 years even. But I was surprised to see Tim Ryan's, but he does have the blue letters. Another thing he's done that is very unique, I've never seen before, some of his bigger signs show it's Tim Ryan for the working class.
That's great. That's great.
It is. It really catches your eye, too. So his signs are pretty good.
Yeah,
so
that's really the essence of his campaign, too. It's bring the jobs back.
That's right. Yeah, he's done a good job.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing more Tim Ryan signs still, in Ohio, I guess. I'm seeing more Vance. But I am seeing, some Ryan signs here and there to compete with them. So it makes me feel good.
That's good.
Yeah.
What are you hearing, Wendy, what are you hearing in your local news about how the polling is going and how that election is probably going to play out?
I don't watch the local news at all.
Okay. Yeah, same here. So.
Streaming, it's hard to get local news.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to go to your actual TV channel, and for people who are cord cutters or just have cable, that's just typically not available. So
yeah,
Wendy,
it's been so exciting on Tuesday that I can't wait.
Yeah, there you go. Me too. Wendy, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate it. Teresa in Aurora, Colorado. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was calling about young voters.
Mm-hmm.
I have been voting since I was 18 years old. I'm 57. My mother took me to vote when I first voted. I took my daughter to vote when she turned 18. And I never, ever went to a rally. I never had to have someone come and tell me, what's going on. I guess it's just because my parents have always been involved in politics, and I've always been involved in politics. So when my daughter gets her ballot, and in Colorado, when you can register to vote when you get your driver's license. So then you are sent a ballot to your home, and you can mail it back. You can still go and vote in person. You can drop it in a drop-off box. So I always get so confused when they say young voters, that Democrats aren't reaching out to young voters. And I'm like, well, what are the parents doing? Do you know how to get involved yourself?
Yeah.
If the gun violence is in school shootings and gun violence is in your life, your daily life.
I'm with you, Teresa. This is our job to do, too. Teresa, thank you. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. If you believe that someone is a billionaire without seeing their taxes, if you believe someone is a genius if they hide their college grades, if you believe someone is a great businessman if they bankrupted casinos, if you believe somebody is an irresistible ladies' man if they have to pay for sex or even accused of rape, if you believe somebody is a philanthropist, if their charity got shut down for fraud and their children had to go through mandatory training about how not to commit fraud with philanthropies, if you believe someone is a patriot, if they got out of the draft during a time of war by submitting phony, dodgy x-rays showing bone spurs, if you believe someone is a Christian who doesn't go to church and doesn't know what 2 Thessalonians is, if you believe someone is an innocent man if they refuse to testify, well, you're not just gullible, you're a Trump supporter. I have a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Okay, during the break, I tracked down that quote from Rebbe Mastriano, Doug Mastriano's wife. And she said, I would like to make a comment on that real quick. As a family, we so much love Israel. In fact, I'm going to say we probably love Israel more than a lot of Jews do. Right. We're not anti-Semitic, but we love Israel more than Jews do. Seriously? Seriously? All right. Picking up your phone calls. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's on your mind today?
About the campaign,
Yeah.
the rallies that we're watching right now, kind of disappointed in Stacey Abrams because she cannot counterpunch Brian Kemp, the other debate that we saw. But Barack Obama is doing a better job to punch the Republicans than Stacey, when Stacey's the one that's running.
Yeah, well, she's
And
a little
Kerry
more
Lake stuff.
thoughtful, and he's a great orator. I mean, comparing anybody to the oratorical skills of Barack Obama is going to be a risky situation.
How about the Kerry Lake stuff? And then she's so confident that she's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, or is it possible they have fake electors again?
We'll see. We'll see. Anything's possible these days, Johan. Anything is possible. There's just so much weirdness going on out there. But I just don't know. I'm on pins and needles like everybody else. We still have a week to go. 1 week from today, we'll have a clue, and probably a week from tomorrow or Thursday, we'll know for sure. Johan, thank you for the call. Glenn in Falls City, Washington. Hey, Glenn, you know the origin of the kitty litter in classroom story?
Oh, I don't know it terribly well, but I heard it on This American Life, actually. They were talking about, they had a whole show about identity and whatnot, but they tracked it down, and they found that kitty litter in the Colorado school, I believe in this county where Columbine was, they kept that in buckets and candy for diabetic kids in case of lockdowns. Or school shooting.
So if you were locked down, you could pee into the bucket of kitty litter.
Yeah, exactly. And, just as an aside, I remember when I was 4, I think I identified as Marty McFly for a few days. I knew people about that same age that identified as kitties for a couple days. It's just what kids do.
Yeah.
They're strange little creatures. And
we all were.
That's what we do to grow up.
We all were. Glenn, thank you. Thanks for that. That's fascinating, the backstory there. I appreciate that. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good morning. Well, good afternoon. What's on my mind is when you describe the Republican posters artificially inflating their numbers, I agree with you. I know it's happening. But don't you think a lot of this has to do with those two Republican brothers that own most of the voting machines in the South? All they need to do is touch a button. We know how easily that can be.
That's no longer the case. It hasn't been for 15 years or thereabouts. And B, the voting machines are. I'm confident the voting machines are secure these days, John. The problem never really was the voting machines. It was the tabulator software. It was after the voting machines compile the numbers, they hand them off to people who put them into spreadsheets. And this is what happened to Don Siegelman. Somebody just changed the spreadsheet.
Exactly. And I didn't think anything changed as far as who owns the voting machine, who owns the software.
There's been a lot of change. Diebold got sold. ES&S became another company. There's been a lot of change since. Basically, you're thinking back to the 2004 election, and that was the one where there was some. It was very sketchy what was going on in Ohio. But again, it wasn't the voting machines as much as it was the tabulators. John, thank you for the call. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We're picking up your phone calls. We'll be right back. Another bizarre Donald Trump story I'll share with you on the other side of the break, too. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Place where despair is not an option. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, "Hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, that people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests, so we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away." At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gopers' economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. There are no good, solid numbers on it, but it appears that the majority of people who have Medicare Advantage programs or plans believe that they're on Medicare. This is certainly how Medicare Advantage is sold. Oh, you're missing out on benefits under Medicare. It's Medicare Part C, don't you know? C for commercial, right? But people don't realize that when you sign up for Medicare Advantage, called Medicare Advantage plans. We all need to be supportive of this. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Wow, a lot going on here. Sue in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Sue, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm from the conservative state of Missouri, and I live in Greene County, which is Springfield, Missouri, which is very, very Republican. Mm-hmm. And according to our Springfield Business Journal, has done an informal poll that puts Trudy Bush Valentine at 50% and Eric Schmidt, our Attorney General, at 49%. If that could hold, even though it's not scientific, we could get another Democrat to the Senate. We also have, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Josh Hawley, that defeated our beloved Clara McCaskill. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to let you know that.
So Trudy's the Democrat?
Springfield, Trudy Bush, yes, she's a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And she is from the Bush family.
Oh, interesting.
August. Yeah, August Bush. Bush beer.
Oh, B-U-S-C-H.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And our Attorney General, his name is Eric Schmidt, that's running against her. He has made everybody, all of the teachers in Missouri, very angry. He's been mask mandates. He's been, against those. And he's several of our big school districts, he's wanting to audit them. And he's just been a thorn in the side to educators in Missouri.
I get it.
So, what can I say?
Well, good luck, Sue. And another great report, and let's hope for the best. Sue, thank you for the call, and thanks for the information. Phil in Chicago. Hey, Phil, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I was wondering if you can suggest, and I'm sorry if you've talked about this before, if you could suggest any easy resources to help me decide what judges to vote for. I find that pretty tough.
What I have done, I kind of cheat here, and I'll own up to it. We have a progressive weekly newspaper here in Oregon called Willamette Week. And in fact, when I used to do a local show here in Portland, the publisher and editor-in-chief used to come on the show all the time. And so I trust their instincts. And because I do a national show and I'm, plus I'm writing books and stuff, I don't have the time to really immerse myself in local politics. I'm pretty disconnected from what's going on locally. So whenever, in fact, Louise and I voted yesterday afternoon, because everybody in Oregon votes by mail. We got our ballots last week, and I mailed them in yesterday. And so what we did was we pulled up the website for Willamette Week, that newspaper, and they have a voter's guide. So I'm assuming that there's, a progressive weekly, or there's the equivalent of that in Chicago, that might give you some thoughts, at least as a starting point. Do you know of any options in that regard?
That does make sense. I'm actually just visiting Chicago, but I'm sure Chicago's good. But yeah, in my hometown, I can think of one. Yeah, good. I mean, that's where I would start. I've used Willamette Week's voter guides for years. I have a long relationship with progressive weekly newspapers. Back in the '60s, I used to live in the building in the house where they published the paper at MSU. It was called The Paper. And so I've always kind of trusted those kind of publications. There's another one here in Portland too, the Portland Mercury, that's really good. So that would be where I would start. Phil, thanks a lot for the call. Roberta in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Hey, Roberta, what's up? Oh, Roberta just hung up. I think sometimes that happens when people try to take you off hold. Chuck in San Antonio. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind today?
So, Tom, first of all, you and I have talked for several different times, and you knew at one point in time I was a Republican, but that changed in 2016.
Okay.
Anyway, to the point, I keep hearing the Republicans saying denying how they want to do away with Social Security, and I heard one media personality say, well, it's simple, just let the younger employees opt out and ask for their contributions back, which is a fallacy in that they're not making contributions. They're paying taxes, which are paying people like my Social Security benefits. There's no account that's gaining interest.
Yeah, up until 1983, that was true. Up until 1983, all of the money that went out of Social Security was balanced by all the money that came in. In 83, Reagan's reform was to increase the Social, and this was because the boomers were going to be retiring in 20 years. So the reform was to create a Social Security trust fund and basically double tax the boomers so that, by increasing the Social Security tax to create this giant fund. It's now, I believe it's around $3 trillion. It might be $2 trillion. It's one or the other, but it's a massive amount of money. And in fact, it's one of the largest holders of U.S. Treasury bills, period. And that Social Security trust fund, people will point out to you that is starting to decline. It's starting to go down. Well, it was designed to. It's supposed to go all the way back down to zero by about 2040 when the last of the boomers die out. And then Social Security is supposed to go back to being able to, the money coming in will cover the money going out. So just FYI, Chuck.
And I only knew this part. I realized part of that when I did my master's paper. It was after 1983, and my reading was that anything in excess of what was taken in and paid out was what went into the trust fund.
That's correct.
That the trust fund really is just it's a paper exercise, really. I mean, it's
it's a real fund. It's genuine allocated money. I mean, there was that debate between Al Gore and George Bush in 2000 about whether it should be in a lockbox, whether it should be an unrateable fund, essentially. But for all practical purposes, it is.
And regardless, the point being, Republicans want to deny what they really want to do, and people are letting them get away with it, and I won't let them get away with it.
Yeah, they wanted to give it to Wall Street. You got a bunch of guys on Wall Street who would just love to have $2 trillion sitting in their account. They could just skim, 0.5% off the top and be billionaires for the rest of their lives. And that was what George W. Bush really was pushing in 2005 after he won that election. When he won his re-election, he traveled around the country pitching Social Security privatization. And the more he talked about it, the less popular it became. So he finally gave up and said, okay, we'll just settle for privatizing Medicare, which he had done in 2003 with Medicare Advantage. So, but
that's another story altogether.
Yeah, but good on you, Chuck, for keeping them honest.
That. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. CJ in Madison. Hey, CJ, what's on your mind today?
Well, thanks for taking my call again, Tom. I'm a Republican, a conservative Republican, and nobody is championing this attack on Paul Pelosi. Not one Republican, but it does point out the hypocrisy that now all of a sudden it's a crime, and that illegal alien that was here that attacked Paul Pelosi also shows that DAs around the country who have been recalled because they're weak on crime, and the mere fact that it took Martha's Vineyard for Democrats to care about illegal immigration, and the mere fact that you misrepresent what Republicans want. We are not championing people that have attacked Paul Pelosi. Not one. I haven't heard one. And
I see Donald Trump Jr. Making jokes about it. I see Carrie Lake making jokes about it. I just think it's in terrible taste, frankly. And you can pull up as many straw men or alternative arguments or gee whataboutisms as you want. The reality is that this guy who attacked Paul Pelosi, whether he was, I believe he was a Canadian, but regardless of where he came from, he was believing the talking points that people in your party, the Republicans, have been putting out, that elections have been stolen. He was believing that the Democrats are evil, so evil that they need to be physically attacked. He was believing these QAnon conspiracy theories. And you've got people throughout the Republican Party, right across the Republican Party, who are all, if not promoting this, and some of them are openly promoting this, Donald Trump and others, but you've got others who are simply tolerating it. And, like yourself, you just called up and said, yeah, I'm tolerating this stuff, essentially. And I think that that's disgusting, frankly. I think that's, it's somewhere between disgusting and pathetic. And, if you were actually a Republican and if you were actually a patriot, if you actually cared about this country, you would be condemning political violence. And you would be condemning these hysterical conspiracy theories being promoted by these far-right people in the Republican Party who are encouraging stochastic terrorism and this kind of violence.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And have the courage to do it. It's a real sad state of affairs here. And welcome back. Gabriella in Tahunga, California. Hey, Gabriella, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Regarding the gentleman that wanted to know about judges, I found two really great sites, and they tend to be blue. One is neutral, and I'm in California, so I'm guessing they're everywhere. The first one is bluevoterguide.org.
Okay.
And the next one that I've used before, and they're neutral, but what they do is they compare in every single slot who they are. They compare the people running, their background, so it makes for a good educational thing. You can vote on yourself. That's Voter's Edge.
Okay. Hang on just a second. I'm trying to check out this Blue Voters Guide. Oh, I plugged in Oregon, and it says, sorry, we do not support Oregon. So they're not quite there yet, but it looks like it's a start.
It was a good guide. And they even were a bit more progressive than I tend to be. So in a few things, I went by my LA Times, and most of it I agreed with anyway. Mm-hmm. And just an FYI, I'm so blessed to be in California still. We got our, vote by mail. They're sending them to everyone now, and you have a choice how to do it.
Yep.
And it's taken me like 3 weeks in between knocking on doors and writing postcards to finally get through it. We had one of the longest ones ever in the city of Los Angeles. And I finally got through the whole thing in about 6 hours.
Whoa.
We filled it out. We put it in the drop box in the local park. My husband saw them pick it up within hours of when we dropped it off, and that was yesterday. And today they've already said they've received it and counted it.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Oh,
So
I couldn't be happier.
Isn't voting by mail just liberating? When it's been 15 years, I think, more or less, since Louise and I first moved to Oregon, and the ballot just arrived in our mailbox, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. I could just take my time. I can look these people up. I can, because I would always, in the past, living in New Hampshire or Vermont or Michigan or whatever, you show up and there's always some ballot initiative or some judge or some, county commissioner or something, and you're going, I don't know who the hell that is, and, or what that's all about. And voting from home, you can look people up. You can look things up.
This is correct. May I say one thing regarding that, though?
By all means.
Okay. I have always loved, since I was 18 and I am 70, voting in person. I get to see my local people, neighbors who I do or don't agree with. Same people used to run it all the time. I used to even bring my puppy dog, and she'd get a sticker on her forehead. And since COVID, that was the first time I did by mail. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, in these days and times, I'm very happy that option is available.
Right. Plus, you don't have some guy dressed in camo with an AR-15 slung over his shoulder standing outside your polling place taking your picture.
You got it, sir.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Gabriella. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a second. Stick around. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Joe Biden has done a lot. He signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. He announced targeted student debt relief plan. He issued 2 executive orders to safeguard access to reproductive health care. He signed the CHIPS and Science Act into law. He signed the PACT Act into law for our veterans. We have historically low unemployment rates, lower than we've had since the 1960s. He helped our economy recover through the American Rescue Plan. He confirmed our first black justice to the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. He expanded the NATO alliance. He rallied our allies in support of Ukraine. He's made once-in-a-generation infrastructure investments. We have record enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. More Americans have health care now than ever before, over the objections of the Republicans, I might add. Historic funding for HBCUs, the historically black college and universities. He reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. I mean, just step by step, there has been so much that has been accomplished. In the face of all this Republican obstruction, there's a video with the complete list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Picking up your calls here. Mark in Gustine, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Enjoy your show. You know, this Republican that called you a couple of calls back, he's just missing the whole point. It's the people in the Republican leadership, their silence that is saying everything. Well,
it goes beyond that. Trump was on a radio show yesterday afternoon, and wait a minute, today is Tuesday? Yeah, okay, it was today. Yeah. He was on this radio show this morning, and he was asked about this, and he said, and I quote, "There are weird things going on in that household. The glass, it seems, was broken from the inside to the out, so it wasn't a break-in, it was a break-out."
Well, if anybody knows weird, it's Donald Trump. So, gosh, I like I told your screener, I was just so mad because these guys are blaming the victim.
I know.
And it just seems like this happens all the time. Yep. One more thing, Tom, before I let you go. We have one job to do as Democrats and as Americans. We have one job to do, and that is to vote. heck with the polls. Don't even pay attention to the polls. Just get out and vote. That is the main thing.
Yeah.
Everything else will take care of itself.
Amen. Mark, well said. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Michael in the Bronx, or Bronx, New York. Excuse me, Michael. It's no longer the Bronx. What's up?
Yeah, either or is fine. You know, we hear it both ways.
Okay.
But I just had to add my 2 cents to what happened to Paul Pelosi, and it's indeed the Republicans fought the rhetoric that keep inciting this violence. And as far as what Donald Trump said, then explain this, Mr. 45. Why in the world the suspect is reported saying, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" as replaying the January 6th committee. You know, and I got to inform you also, I happen to be noticing on Court TV, there's the Parkland school shooting sentencing phase that victims are making.
The victim statements right now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was fireworks in the courtroom in which it was allegedly, if I heard correctly, the defendant and or defendant supporters flipped the bird at one of the grieving family members, and that ticked the judge off. And then there was also a reference made to Paul Pelosi by one of the defense attorneys. And it really got heated. It really got personal. I'm saying to myself, what the hell is going on here that people have lost the common sense, common decency? This cult, known as MAGA Trumpism, is really becoming the cornerstone of domestic terrorism that's plaguing this nation. People get out and vote and put a stop to this.
Yeah.
Stop to it,
Trump,
even up to the judiciary.
Trump knows that his only chance is to tear America apart, to pit Americans against each other, and that's certainly what he's doing. And it's a tragedy, but that's what's up. Michael, thank you for the call. Vincent in Carson City, Nevada. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Talking about polling, I just got an interesting thing. I get newsletters from the New York Times.
Yeah, Vincent, get your mouth closer to the microphone, please. It sounds like you're talking to me from the bathroom.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
It's the same problem, but okay, go ahead, finish it up. We just have a minute.
Yeah, there's a new poll that just came out. It said, which candidate would you be more likely to vote for? In the close states, Arizona 51-45, up 6. Pennsylvania up 3, 49, up 5, 49-44.
Who's up?
Georgia up 3, 49-46. And only Nevada is a dead heat, 47-47.
Oh, all those other states the Democrats are up.
Yeah, all of these close races, every one of them, all blue.
That's true in the nonpartisan polls. In the polling that's done by the Atlanta Constitution-Journal and the New York Times, for example, in Georgia, they're showing that Reverend Warnock is ahead. And these 5 polls from companies that are associated with Fox News or are right-leaning, they're showing that Herschel Walker is doing well. So, know your poison. Vincent, thank you for the call. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same station. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator. I've been saying this every day for 19 years. It is never more true than it is right now this week. If you have not voted, get out there and vote. If you are in a place where you can, most states have early voting. And double check and make sure that your voter registration is okay and that your vote has been counted. And we'll continue the conversation tomorrow. I'm real interested in hearing your stories about your experiences voting. So have a great afternoon. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit Thom Hartmann.